Hello, and welcome to the Ball and All podcast. This is my basketball podcast where I discuss all things related to the basketball world. I'll be doing this a lot more frequently now. Over the past 2 months, I've been settled down with a lot of cricket. We've been moving around to different stadiums. So now I'm back. We're ready to go into the final third of the NBA season, as well as the Basketball Africa League, which starts on the 5th of March. There are 12 teams that have been selected, two conferences, the Sahara Conference that we're playing in Dakar, Senegal, as well as the Nile Conference that will be playing in Egypt. And then the top four teams in each conference will play in the playoffs in Kigali. So that's going to be really exciting. I wish I could go there. I hope I could get a chance to go and work and do commentary there. For those who don't know, I am a commentator and I do commentary on basketball games. So that would be really lovely for me to be there. But I'll be doing our podcast every day for the Basketball Africa League throughout the entire season. So that's going to be quite good. I might do it twice a week to give you a little bit of space because it does get a little bit too hectic. But remember, you can follow me at Mpomareki, also on Twitter and Instagram. You can also like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Thank you very much to all our supporters. I'm back now. We're going to talk about that. The one thing we want to talk about now, from an NBA perspective, a massive thing happened over the past 24 hours. That's a trade deadline day. It happened. Teams had to pull in their final trades, and we're going to talk about those trades as we go along. Ben Simmons saga is now closed, as well as some other trades that I didn't expect to see, and then we're going to discuss. So we're going to go through all of those and discuss what each of those implications mean. And just let your friends know, let everyone know that we're about to, that they can find, if you're wondering what's going on, this is the best place to be. So the NBA every year allows the teams, gives them a window to trade all their players up and down across the league, but it closes just like in soccer with the trade deadline, with the transfer window deadline. For the NBA, it goes throughout the entire series and closes around about the week before All-Star break. So throughout that period, some players who were signed in off-season were not allowed to be traded. But once they get to this period, everyone is allowed to be traded. So it was really good to see how that's going to go. One last thing before we go to the trade deadline review, we got an NBA All-Star game next week. After trade deadline day, the two captains, LeBron and Kevin Durant, selected their teams. You can see on either side is really lovely set of players, all the best this season. Giannis and I think Team LeBron is very stacked. The funny one was the James Harden pick, because James Harden was picked last, and you could see visibly that Kevin Durant was not happy with James Harden. Good to see Karl Anthony Towns as an all-star. DeJounte Murray, happy that he's gotten his recognition. So too LaMelo Ball, as well as Devin Booker is a two-time all-star. Happy for Fred VanVleet because he was undrafted and he's now an all-star. So that's really good. He took a punt on himself and now it's paying off in Toronto. So trade deadline, so the week before the trade deadline normally starts with some small little moves and everything else to kind of set the scene for trade deadline day. And my word, it was very exciting. Really exciting week. And it started off with the CJ McCollum trade. CJ McCollum was traded from the Portland Trail Blazers to the New Orleans Pelicans. The Pelicans received McCollum, Larry Nance Jr., Tony Snell, as well as the Blazers receiving Nickeil Alexander-Walker, who was traded further to the Jazz, Josh Hart, Didi Louzada, and you can see all the other players that they were traded for. The problem I have with this trade was that Larry Nance Jr. Is a really good player, and I think Portland needed to kind of keep him. But what does it mean for Damian Lillard? Because the week before, the Trailblazers traded out Norm Powell, who's a shooting guard, as well as Robert Covington, who's a really good defender and a really good contract to trade for 2 seconds. And so Portland's telling us that they're wanting to 60 million in cap space now that they want to rebuild. But does Dame want to do a rebuild at age 30, 31? And that's kind of something that's quite interesting. It looks like they're wanting to try to get a high-level free agent, but which level free agent goes to Portland? They can get DeAndre Ayton because the Suns have played that game with him and they didn't want to extend him. So that's the one, but he's restricted. So whatever Portland put down, if the Suns don't want to match, he goes to Portland. But I do think the Suns will end up matching, because I think the Suns might end up in the NBA Finals again and possibly even win it, because they're the best team in basketball. So I'm not too sure about this rebuild with Dame. Anthony Simons looks really good. Nasir Little is okay. She's good. He's not a superstar. The guy you are hoping for is Anthony Simons, but it reminds me of another CJ and Dame combination again. It's just that this time Dame's a lot older than Anthony Simons. So I thought they'd try and do a different rebuild. Maybe look to go get Ben Simmons and let Dame go the other way. But Portland really disappointed me this one, but we'll see how it unfolds in the offseason. Portland's GM situation also is really icky because they've got an interim. We don't know if he's going to stay, but they made the trade. For the Pelicans, they lucked into this. Now they have some sort of a big three with CJ and Zion and Brandon Ingram. They're looking to push for the playoffs and the play-in, and so this is a really good trade for them. And this is something that they could be a contender even next season if they can get Zion healthy, and obviously even make Zion get Zion to extend if you've got like CJ and Brandon Ingram in and around you. I really like that trade for the Pelicans. The other trade that happened on Monday to a couple of days ago that really bothered me. I just didn't understand what was going on, but it was the Kings. So you kind of felt like, okay, I kind of understand why the Kings would do this. Is the Tyrese Halliburton Domantas Sabonis trade. We've always known that Pacers were wanting to just trade one of their stars, either Sabonis or the other center whose name escapes me now. But and so what happened was, they managed to get a trade for Sabonis, and also got moved out on Justin Holland, Jerry Lamb. But the Kings gave away Tyrese Halliburton, who many thought had a higher upside than De'Aaron Fox. He was starting to run the offense. He was starting to look very good in that Pacers team. He shoots 40% across the floor, and he was getting his stride in his second year, in his second year as a pro. And so this one is really baffling, because a lot of Kings fans really loved Tyrese Halliburton. They thought he was the guy they were going to build around. They also moved Buddy Hield, who was a really lovely contract to be moved, and Tristan Thompson. The Pacers in this one win this trade, even though Sabonis is the best player on this sheet, on the slide. The big difference with that is that obviously Halliburton still has to grow. So you're working on Halliburton's upside. Halliburton is more of like a Malcolm Brogdon-esque with a bit of a higher ceiling. So that's going to be interesting to see how they work around that, because we know the Pacers were trying to rebuild. It's a nice little bump for them to rebuild, because I think Halliburton and Brogdon, with the pieces they have with Buddy Hield and all those guys, could help them next season, maybe even get a play-in tournament spot. But it's still purgatory-ish, similar to the Trailblazers. So I don't know if they're going to break it down a little bit further. Buddy Hield's contract really nice. So it's pretty awesome for them to be able to move. But I think Pacers really did well in that to get Tyrese Halliburton, because he is a future star. And I think next season we might see him step up. Similar to like a DeJounte Murray getting up and having a breakthrough season. I think next season we saw glimpses from Tyrese Halliburton this year. But I think next year would be it. So those are the two trades that kind of set up transfer deadline day. Then transfer deadline day begins with this blockbuster 4-team trade. It was unbelievable. Serge Ibaka was traded from the Clippers to the Bucks. I've highlighted the players in yellow because there's so many things around the picks and everything else. But they've traded. So the Clippers traded Ibaka to the Bucks because the Bucks needed another center, because obviously. They've only got DeMarcus Cousins in there, so they're bringing in Ibaka in there. They traded out DiVincenzo, who I think is a massive coup for the Kings. Rodney Hood and Semi Ojeleye left the Pistons to go to the Clippers, with Marvin Bagley going to the Pistons. So great thing for the Kings here is I think they ended up with this trade kind of getting back to a spot where they are going to be quite competitive, because they're going for the play-in, and in them being competitive, they'd be looking to try and push for that playoff spot. And I think DiVincenzo is going to be really good. Last time they were in the playoffs was 2006. So Fox, DiVincenzo, backcourt is really nice. And you've also got Sabonis, who had a really great game in his first game for the Kings. So I really like that for the Kings, and I think they redeemed themselves somewhat with that trade, getting rid of Marvin Bagley Jr., who didn't want to be there in the first place. So that was really good for them. And then obviously the draft picks that are happening there for the Bucks. I think this trade for the Bucks kind of helps them be a lot more competitive, gets them back to that whole land of trees they had about 3 years ago when we thought they could do it, but they stumbled to Philly in that year that Toronto won. So that was a good trade, really, really lovely blockbuster trade to start off trade deadline day. So when something like that happens, teams start getting on their phones. And so here's an interesting trade that happened that nobody necessarily noticed, but I really enjoyed, and I love this for the Celtics. So the Celtics before this had moved Dennis Schroeder to Houston, and they got Daniel Tice back, and I was trying to figure out what was going on, but I kind of felt that they always need centers, and so now they've got Al Horford, Daniel Tice, and also Time Lord in there. And so it's going to be interesting to see how that front court works out. But this one, where they bring in Derrick White from the Spurs, they move off of Josh Richardson's contract. I think is a really nice one because he adds a lot more. He's a much better shooter than Schroeder. He's a much better point guard playmaker than Schroeder, and I think Derrick White's really good for Boston. So I'm looking at Boston, and you can see that they made a couple of tweaks, but then they've positioned themselves really lovely as a bottom, as an away seed in the East, so 4-8. But they can cause a first round upset because you've got Jason Tatum, still have Jaylen Brown. That still needs to be sorted out. But I love that for the Celtics. Really did good work from the Celtics there. Then the biggest trade that happened on deadline day, the one we all were waiting for, Ben Simmons finally leaving Philadelphia. The party that came through was the Brooklyn Nets. They sent James Harden, who was starting to be James Harden of Houston, going on a little bit of a go slow with Paul Millsap. The Nets received Simmons, Seth Curry, Andre Drummond. The loser in this trade is Philadelphia, I think. Yes, they get James Harden, who's an all-world player, top 25 NBA player in the history of the game. So we know who James Harden is, and that's great. Partnering with Embiid will be awesome. The only problem is they have strengthened the Brooklyn Nets defensively. We know Ben Simmons is an all defensive player, an all NBA player. So they still have Brooklyn Nets still have a big three. It's a lighter big three, a diet big three, as you would call it, a poor man's big three. But the fact that now KD and Kyrie have a very good defensive asset who can guard 1, 2, 3, and they also have a sharpshooter in Seth Curry. Joe Harris is injured, so that's a really good one. And you can think of the lineups Steve Nash can put up: Ben Simmons at the 5, KD at the 4, with shooters around them, and Kyrie at the top. Because I'm assuming Kyrie will still play, because I'm sure the vaccination rules will ease up as we go along, closer to the NBA deadline, closer to July, closer to the playoffs. So I'm hoping that. But even if it doesn't, away from home, the Nets will be great. They also got Andre Drummond, who's a really top backup center, and we've seen that throughout the years. And so I love that for the Nets. I really do. I think the Nets got a coup here, and they got some first round draft picks. Remember, they sent everything away in that James Harden trade. At least they got something back. 2 first round picks. Some are protected, some are not. But that's really good for the Nets. I really love that trade for the Nets. It kind of makes the Nets a much stronger contender in the East. I think now they have the ability to get through the Bucks, and that's what's important. And I think Ben Simmons is a guy that can guard him, can guard Giannis, and also Andre Drummond coming off the bench for those minutes would be really good. I know Andre Drummond defensively isn't that great, but he's a body that you can throw at Giannis. The Suns will tell you that you need bodies at center, and they've gotten that now. And then finally, the one last trade that I didn't get and I didn't like, but after the Simmons trade, this one came through. It was the Porzingis Dinwiddie trade. The Mavericks are now tired of Kristaps Porzingis, the unicorn as they call him. They've sent him away to Washington with a second round pick, and they received Spencer Dinwiddie and Davis Bertans. Davis Bertans is a sharpshooter, but Davis Bertans is injured. This is like the injury player trade because Spencer Dinwiddie, he just came off a massive knee injury. He signed with the Wizards. We thought he'd be great. He wasn't great with Bradley Beal, and so the Wizards decided to move off of him because they've got KCP, they've got Kuzma. They really have a lovely core of players that can surround Bradley Beal. I don't get where Kristaps Porzingis fits here, but I do think the Wizards win this trade because then you've got a big man, a stretch five who can give you something else. From a talent perspective, the Wizards win because they get a much better talented player in Kristaps. The only problem is he available? If they can get him healthy, that will be great. The other side, Dallas, I don't get that. You let go of a stretch five and a forward, but you don't bring in a forward into things. So, for instance, I would have gone and gotten a center like a Daniel Tice, or try to see if I can't get a stretch five anywhere in the league, or maybe they'll look in the buyout market. But bringing in Spencer Dinwiddie tells me two things. You're not sure if Jalen Brunson's going to stay during free agency at the end of the season. But the other thing is what's going to happen with Jalen Brunson's minutes. He's had a great season. He's really good with Luka. And he's been great in terms of Jason Kidd's sharing the ball philosophy. And so that's the one thing I'm not too sure about. Dinwiddie's a great player, he's a good player. I don't know how he fits in with Dallas, especially at the top, because of the whole, we've been working to get Jalen Brunson in, unless they don't want to pay Jalen Brunson, but Dinwiddie's very expensive. If they can get Bertans fit, a sharpshooter is needed in Dallas, and he's that guy. So if they can get him fit for the playoffs, that'll be a plus. His contract's a little bit too expensive. Not too expensive, but it's too expensive for a guy who just shoots threes and doesn't defend. And so that's something that the Wizards wanted to get off of. Also, so too with Spencer Dinwiddie. So they just traded bad contracts. And so that was an interesting one, but we'll see how that goes. But that's the lay of the land. One last thing to talk about is the Russell Westbrook and the Lakers. They have to stick with him. They brought him in. They need to find a way to play with him. Russ needs to accept that he's probably going to have to come off the bench or sit in clutch moments because it hasn't worked. And I think the Lakers need to use this time, maybe even the All-Star break, to recalibrate, to figure out how they can go for the last 25 games in the season to get them going well. But outside of that, thank you very much for listening to or watching the Ball and All podcast. Remember, follow me on the different social media platforms. I'll be back early next week with a Basketball Africa League podcast to give you a preview of what's going to happen in Dakar on the 5th of March for the Sahara Conference starting. I'm going to talk about the different teams. The rosters aren't out yet, but I'm going to give you a lay of how the tournament's going to go this year. The league is going to go this year. So do watch out for that. Outside of that, thank you very much for watching. From myself, Mpho Mukrani, goodbye and lesale kakagiso.